Hey folks, Ziggy's back inside again. He doesn't seem to be scared to come out now, but he just doesn't want to come out. So, whatevs. We'll see if I can put him in a cameo when I do the editing of this thing. I just got this book from Japan, Gridman. This is the show that Subara Productions was working on when I first entered the company. So it's kind of exciting to see all these great behind-the-scenes pictures and stuff from the show and the people that worked there back then. And I thought I'd show you one person. There he is. That's Shibuya-san. He was my friend at Subara Productions. He always made fun of my accent, my American accent. He would kind of imitate my American accent whenever he spoke to me. But I told him once that I could understand him better when he spoke to me in his fake American accent. So he just kept on doing it, and actually I could understand what he was saying better when he spoke in the fake American accent. Go figure. Anyway, so somebody asked me the other day to speak on the question, is Zen really Buddhism? Well, according to Shambhala, no. The Shambhala Dictionary of Buddhism and Zen. Love that title. But according to Mr. Dogen, not only is Zen Buddhism, it is the only form of Buddhism. Let me see. There's a section in Bendoa when he says, remember that this title, the Zen sect, Zenshu is probably what he's saying in Japanese, was established in China and the East and was not heard in India. When the great master Bodhidharma first stayed at Shaolin Temple in the Sungshan Mountains and faced the wall for 9 years, monks and laymen were still ignorant of the Buddha's right dharma, so they called Master Bodhidharma a Brahmin who made a religion of Zazen. Thereafter, the patriarchs of successive generations all constantly devoted themselves to Zazen. Stupid secular people who saw this, not knowing the reality, talked at random of a Zazen sect. Nowadays, dropping the word Za, they talk of just the Zen sect. This interpretation is clear from the records of the patriarchs, that this Buddha Dharma is the legitimate intention of the one-to-one transmission has never been concealed through the ages. In the order on Vulture Peak, that's Buddha's, the original, OG Buddha's original order, in ancient times, when the Tathagata, the Buddha, gave the Dharma to the Venerable Mahakashapa, transmitting the right Dharma eye treasury and fine mind of Nirvana, the supreme and great method, only to him, the ceremony was witnessed directly by beings among the celestial throng, which are present in the world above, so it must never be doubted. It is a universal rule that those celestial beings will guard and maintain the Buddha Dharma eternally. Their efforts have never faded. Just remember that this transmission of Zazen is the whole truth of the Buddha's Dharma. Nothing can be compared with it. The end. So he says for sure Zen is Buddhism. Now, why does this question even arise? So let's get into that, since you may be wondering. In every religion, there is a mystical version of it, a mystical sort of subset of it. In Christianity, this is represented by people like St. John of the Cross. Pseudo-Dionysus, the guy who signed his name Dionysus but wasn't really Dionysus. There are several others, John Scotus Erigena. In more contemporary times, Meister Eckhart and people like that represent the kind of mystical side of Christianity. In Islam, you have Sufism. In Hinduism, you have the Advaita Vedanta tradition. In Judaism, you have the Kabbalah. Probably every religion you could name has this mystical subsect, which is always regarded by the people in the mainstream version of that religion as being sort of like, they sort of look at it like the guys who wrote this book. I don't know if they're part of us, but the mystical subset of the religion generally uses the same sort of iconography and the same language as the overall religion, as the more standard form of the religion. The Sufis, I don't know, maybe the Sufis talk about Allah. I assume they talk about Allah. The Buddhists talk about Buddha, and then the Zen Buddhists also talk about Buddha. The meaning is slightly different sometimes when the Zen Buddhists use the word Buddha, because they use the word Buddha to mean a kind of a big overarching principle, this kind of something that's out there or in here and that is mystical and profound, rather than just the guy Shakyamuni Buddha who lived 2,500 years ago. So this always happens, and because of this, a lot of Buddhists don't think of Zen as being part of Buddhism. But in Zen Buddhism, it's definitely part of the deal that this is Buddhism. You could sit and argue about this all day long, and you never get an answer. Unfortunately, there is no single arbiter of this to turn to appeal to and say, okay, is this it? It's not like McDonald's. Like McDonald's owns the trademark of the name McDonald's and the golden arches and the name Big Mac and the name Filet-O-Fish, or whatever they have in their repertoire of trademarks. And if I went out there and started my own burger stand and called it McDonald's and didn't have the proper paperwork, they could come and sue me and put me out of business. And that's the way it works. And by the way, I was in Tijuana a couple of years ago, and I came across this restaurant called Taco Bell that was obviously not a Taco Bell. So sometimes the system breaks down with trademarks, but most of it is pretty well established, and people follow the rules. So there's nobody like that with Buddhism. I mean, there's plenty of people who think that they're the arbiter of what is and is not Buddhism, and there's plenty of people who would like to be, the central authority which authorizes everybody who is a Buddhist to, to do what they say they should do and to follow their rules and stuff. But that ain't the way it works in the real world. So this debate is one of those things that could go on forever. As a person who studied Dogen's philosophy, I believe that what Dogen taught and that what my teacher Guru Nishijima Roshi taught and what has been taught in that lineage is Buddhism, is the direct transmission from the historical Buddha. There are other people who would argue with me and say that that's not true. The historicity of it is always difficult to figure out, because depending on what documents you look at, you're going to come up with one conclusion. And if you look at a different set of documents, you're going to come up with a different conclusion. So it kind of doesn't work to look at it that way. The interesting thing about Zen, in contrast to the other mystical subsets of other religions, is that Zen became the main version of Buddhism in China in the Middle Ages, and remains. It doesn't really remain the main form of Buddhism in China nowadays, as far as I know, because with the Cultural Revolution and everything, it all became kind of wonky in China, so it's hard to say exactly what the state of Buddhism is in China, or at least in mainland China. But it remains the main form of Buddhism in Japan, even now. I mean, Pure Land is arguably, running neck and neck with Zen. I'm not sure exactly what the statistics are. Maybe Pure Land is a little bigger than Zen, but Zen is definitely in the mainstream as far as Japan is concerned, as far as religions, which makes it unusual. It's unusual that the mystical form of a religion becomes the mainstream form of religion, because you don't see that with Judaism or Christianity or Islam or any other religion I can think of, where the mystical form became the mainstream form. So that makes it even a little harder. It makes the arguments a little bit more heated, let's say, among people who want to argue this point, whether Zen is part of Buddhism or not. To me, the main argument in favor of Zen being Buddhism, plain and simple, is the fact that the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, the original guy who started this all, went around India teaching people to meditate. And dhyana, which became chan in China, which became Zen in Japan, means meditate. And that is what he taught. And that was the main thing he taught, and he taught it to everybody without distinction. He didn't say, well, these people can meditate and these people shouldn't meditate. He was teaching meditation to everybody. And a lot of the other sort of what is tended to be called the mainstream Buddhisms outside of Zen have tended to not do nearly as much meditation. But Zen, the Zen sect, which, as we saw, Dogen doesn't even like that word, they were the ones who maintained Zazen, dhyana, meditation practice as the main thing that they did, while other forms of Buddhism deviated and went off their own ways. The reason that Zen would be probably called not a form of Buddhism is because it doesn't look to, for example, the Pali Canon so much. The Pali Canon is the oldest. Actually, I've heard arguments that the Pali Canon is no longer considered the oldest, but for a long time, the Pali Canon was considered, and probably is still by a lot of people, considered to be the oldest strata of Buddhist writings. These writings that were done in the Pali language, about 200 or 300 years after Buddha's death. Those remain the oldest strata, although, like I said, somebody's recently discovered something that they think is older. I don't know the details. But the Zen sect, and I'm sort of kind of demonstrating this in the way I'm talking about it, kind of doesn't worry about those too much. Now, our man Dogen is a little bit different. He does talk about the Pali Canon stuff in Shobogenzo and other places, whereas a lot of people didn't, and that is part of his policy of considering the Zen stream to be the mainstream of Buddhism, and the only form of Buddhism that's legitimate. That's the way he would put it. The thing is, when Dogen talks about those Pali Canon bits, he gives them a different sort of spin. And if you want to know some of that, if you're interested, you can go back and look at my videos on the 10 Precepts and the Noble Eightfold Path, because those are things that come from early Buddhism. Well, the 10 Precepts are a little bit different, but the Noble Eightfold Path definitely comes from early Buddhism. And when I was doing those videos, I gave some quotes by Dogen on his interpretations of the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's a little mystical and it's a little different from how it usually gets interpreted, but he felt that his version was the correct way to understand this. There are people out there who argue that Zen is just Advaita Vedanta, which is part of the Hindu system reimagined with Buddhist terminology. But that's an interesting argument, because other people argue the exact opposite. They say that Advaita Vedanta isn't really Hinduism, it's just Buddhism dressed up in Hindu terminology. So there's people that argue both sides of that, and there doesn't seem to be any clear resolution to that either. So, I don't know. I come down on the side that Zen is definitely Buddhism, but it doesn't really matter that much, because the idea of Buddhism isn't that it is a transmission from a supernatural being. The way Islam and the way Christianity are presented is that there is a supernatural being. Let's talk about the Christian one, since the Islamic one is a little problematic sometimes to talk about and people get upset. But in Christianity, you have one guy, Jesus, who is definitely a special person. He's not a person like other people. He's the Son of God, and because he's the Son of God, his word is the final authority on everything, because you can't get much more final than the word of God. And if the Son of God tells you something, you can assume that he's got it straight from his dad, and there you go. Buddhism has never had that idea. Buddha is regarded as a human being who discovered something very beautiful and useful in human life, and he's a sort of a genius. So I've said this before, but I tend to think of Buddha the way you would think of Einstein or Stephen Hawking or somebody like that, who's a genius in scientific field, meaning that he's not divine, and his word isn't the absolute be all and end all, but he is nevertheless somebody special. So if you want to argue about theoretical physics with Einstein or Stephen Hawking, you better be pretty good, although both of them have passed away now. But anyway, if you want to argue with the theories that they left behind, you better be pretty sure of what you're doing before you argue with that. So not just anybody can just say, well, I don't think Einstein was right, and be taken seriously. Same with Buddha. Not just anybody, not just any old person go, well, I think Buddha was wrong about that. You'd have to have the sort of background that he had and the sort of training and understanding that he had before you can even enter into that sort of argument. So that's where Buddha stands. So the idea that you can kind of move on and transcend maybe and add to and clarify and make better the things that Buddha started, that's where the Zen sect, that's what they believe. What we believe is that you can move on with this thing, as if Einstein started the theory of relativity, and we can expand on this theory of relativity and we can explain it in better ways, and we can be more detailed, and maybe we can even falsify it if we want, but probably not likely, at least not entirely falsify it. It's that sort of an idea, and people who are in more traditional forms of Buddhism don't like that idea, because I think there tends to be a bit of a confusion about it, in that they'll get the idea that Buddha said it, I believe it, that settles it. It has to be the be-all and end-all, what Buddha said. Anyway, if you want to argue with me about Zen and Buddha, no, not that. If you want to support me thinking that Zen is part of Buddhism, I don't know. If you want to send me money to these URL that you are seeing on the screen. That's my only way of making a living. That's how I buy Ziggy dog food and everything else. But if you're having financial trouble, as I always say, don't send any money to me, because I'm hanging in there, and the reason I'm hanging in there is because people do send money, so thank you very much for that. Have a good time all the time. See you later, and we'll see what kind of a cameo I can get from Ziggy inside. Hey Zig, enjoying your bed? You don't like the trash guys, huh? Maybe that's why you didn't want to come out. How you doing, Ziggy?